This is Sanxi Bay. This is Censor Studio. Madagascar's government was overthrown in a revolution. There have been many protests and revolutions worldwide recently. Today, let's take a closer look at this topic. Let's get right into it. Since September 25th, the MZ generation has led anti-government protests in several cities, including Antananarivo, Madagascar. Protests were due to frequent water and power outages. President Andry Rajoelina of Madagascar tried to ease tensions by dismissing his cabinet. The dissatisfaction among the youth did not subside. In fact, it seemed to grow even larger. The reason for this is as follows. Madagascar is among the world's poorest nations, with 75% of people living below the poverty line. Additionally, with unemployment near 40%, many young people were dissatisfied with the country. The protests then spread across Madagascar. In the process, the government's hardline crackdown to prevent the spread of protests actually made the protests even bigger. Due to the government's harsh response, there were many casualties and injuries. The United Nations reported that at least 22 were killed and over 100 injured during the intense September 25-26 protests. But here, a major turning point occurred. On October 11th, the military joined the protests. As the protests spread throughout Madagascar, Andry Rajoelina, the president of Madagascar, ordered the soldiers to open fire on the protesters. The CAPSAT unit, an elite army group of administrative and technical officers, refused orders to fire on protesters and quickly joined the demonstrations. After that, the protests, which were mainly led by the MZ generation, gradually became centered around the CAPSAT unit. More and more soldiers began joining the protesters, and the government's control started to collapse rapidly. Major General Demosthenes Piklas, appointed Army Chief of Staff by CAPSAT, announced on October 13 he would take control of the military. In that situation, protesters kept demanding Madagascar's President Andry Rajoelina resign, but he refused to step down. Then, as the protests grew larger and even the military joined the protesters, the pressure kept increasing. President Andry Rajoelina of Madagascar, feeling that his life was in danger, fled abroad with the help of France. President Andry Rajoelina of Madagascar delivered a video address on Facebook on October 13th ordering Parliament's dissolution and rejecting protesters' calls for his resignation. The order to dissolve Parliament was announced during impeachment talks against the president, causing opposition backlash. President Andry Rajoelina's order to dissolve Madagascar's parliament was not enforced. On October 14th, Madagascar's parliament passed the impeachment motion against President Andry Rajoelina with 130 out of 163 votes. Votes far surpassed 1/3 of total seats, leading to Madagascar's government being overthrown. After Nepal, this was another revolution led by the MZ generation. What's especially interesting is, in 2009, Madagascar was in a similar situation. At that time, there were also anti-government protests, and the person who led the 2009 anti-government protests is now Andry Rajoelina, the president of Madagascar. Additionally, the CAPSAT unit, which had supported earlier efforts, also led this anti-government protest. After that, he was inaugurated as the head of Madagascar's transitional government. He skipped the 2013 presidential race, but was elected president in 2018 and re-elected in 2023. He ultimately faced anti-government protests and was forced to step down after the CAPSAT unit intervened. The main issue is what happens next, as the country may become even more chaotic. The military, which joined the anti-government protests, declared that it had seized power and ordered the dissolution of all state institutions except for the parliament. Colonel Michael Landaria Narina of the Army Elite Unit CAPSAT announced on state radio that they had taken power. Madagascar's Supreme Court announced on its website that Colonel Landaria Narina was appointed president, indicating the military will soon fully control the country. Some protesters are cautiously responding to military rule. They urge the military to swiftly hand over power to civilians and hold elections. The Supreme Court of Madagascar ordered interim President Randaria Narina to hold elections within 60 days. Randaria Narina told reporters a military-led committee and the transitional government would rule the country for up to 2 years before new elections. Military takeover doesn't mean Madagascar's turmoil is over. Real instability may just be starting. Madagascar depends on foreign aid for over half its national budget. Without backing from the World Bank, International Monetary Fund, European Union, and France, it's hard for the country's system to survive. Growing concerns are emerging that international aid could be suspended as the risk of prolonged military rule rises. Madagascar's highly vulnerable economic structure is another concern. Madagascar imports over 30% of its food, as well as most of its fuel and medicine. The revolution succeeded, but the next phase is even more complex and challenging. Military leaders promised elections in 60 days, but many say that's unrealistic. Because with such a huge political vacuum and an administrative system that's almost completely paralyzed, holding an election in just 2 months is nearly impossible. Randiaria Nirina, claiming she will lead a military government for 2 years, announced her rule, making future power struggles likely. Such military regimes often lead to human rights issues like media censorship and opposition oppression. Recently, the state-run broadcasting station fell under military control. If this continues, the international community will grow more critical, and if a military dictatorship starts, economic sanctions will hit. Madagascar's fragile economy would be doomed. If sanctions are imposed, Madagascar could soon face food and medical supply shortages. Calls for freedom still echo in the streets, but if built on economic collapse, those cries may become screams. In the end, this revolution succeeded in toppling the regime, but there is still a long way to go in rebuilding the nation. This revolution in Madagascar symbolizes a generational power shift led by the MZ generation. They lacked political experience and organization, but shared anger at inequality and corruption and a desire for change. What's interesting is that this movement isn't unique to Madagascar. In Nepal, in Algeria, and even in France and Europe, young people are taking to the streets and challenging the established political system. This generation uses social media and digital networks to organize and spread ideas in ways that differ greatly from the past. They don't just end their protests as cries in the streets. They create public opinion online, communicate directly with foreign media, and draw the attention of the international community to their own country. They're making excellent use of social media and the media. Recently, protests and revolutions led by the MZ generation have been taking place all over the world. It's not just a momentary outburst of anger or political event, but a phenomenon where the direction and values of a generation are clashing with the structure of society. These movements occur in countries facing economic instability and growing social inequality. Young people now realize they lack the same opportunities the older generation had. Prices are rising, wages are flat, jobs are declining, and taxes and debt are up. Here, outdated systems and policies from the older generation are limiting the younger generation. In developing countries like Madagascar, Nepal, and Algeria, corruption and bad economic policies are pushing young people to extremes. The government cites economic growth for stability, but young people's reality is very different. Job opportunities are gone, and hope for the future is fading. In the case of Madagascar, more than half of the population is young people under the age of 25, and a significant number of them are unemployed. Amid this imbalance, anger has erupted over the weight. Developed countries face the same situation. Even France's anti-austerity protests share the same root cause. Economic opportunities are declining, but politics remain unchanged. As a result, young people have stopped trusting the existing political channels and have started to take direct action themselves. This generation lacks the patience their parents had. They stand up against unfair systems and show through their actions a determination to create change themselves if change is too slow. They gather opinions online, protest in public, and inform international media about their country's situation, creating new ways to participate politically. Ultimately, the protests of the MG generation happening around the world right now are not just simple political movements, but acts of resistance against intergenerational inequality and a collective response to the failure of the economic system. It shows they won't tolerate their parents' accepted inequality, political corruption, or slow reform anymore. This is a generational conflict affecting the entire era, not just a national issue. Currently, we are seeing protests by young people happening all around the world. What do you think about the current situation? Please let us know your thoughts in the comments. That's the end. Thank you.